All right. So, looks like we're diving into writing in English.
Okay.
Yeah. And based on what you shared, it seems like you really want to improve your writing, from basic sentences all the way to essays, articles, even creative writing stuff.
Wow.
That was pretty cool, right? And what really stood out to me was how these sources all talk about how important good writing is, not just for, expanding your vocab,
right,
but for boosting your confidence and even opening up job opportunities, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, you've hit on something really important there. Being able to communicate well is such a game changer no matter what language you're using.
Oh, totally.
It goes way beyond just grammar and punctuation. It's about thinking critically, making connections, and really making your voice heard.
Absolutely. So let's break down why writing in English is so valuable.
Yeah.
Especially, for someone who's already working on their skills.
Right.
I noticed these sources mention some really interesting benefits that go beyond just the basics. A lot of them talk about how writing can actually help you think better.
That's a really important point because writing isn't just about communicating with other people. It's also about clarifying your own thoughts. When you put ideas into words, you have to organize them in a way that speaking sometimes doesn't. It's like looking into a mirror and seeing your thought process right there in front of you.
Yeah, I totally get that. Whenever I'm trying to understand something complex, writing about, it always helps me sort of untangle it in my head.
Exactly. And in that process, you might even discover new ideas or perspectives that you hadn't thought about before.
It's like writing becomes a tool for self-discovery as much as it is for communication.
Right.
So let's move on to the different types of writing that these sources cover.
Yeah.
They seem to range from the very basic, sentences and paragraphs to more complex forms like essays, articles, even creative writing.
Yeah, and it's really smart to approach it that way. Mastering the basics is like building a strong foundation,
Yeah.
Think of sentences as the bricks and mortar of any writing.
Sure.
If your sentences are weak or unclear, the whole structure will crumble.
So how do we go from just putting words together to crafting sentences that are really impactful?
Well, one technique that I find incredibly helpful is something called sentence expansion.
Okay.
So let's say you have a basic sentence like, the bird sang.
Okay.
It gets the message across, but it's a little bland, right?
Right.
Now imagine adding more detail like, the tiny wren perched atop the weathered fence post belted out a surprisingly powerful melody.
Wow.
You see how adding those details creates a more vivid picture in the reader's mind?
Yeah, that's a great example. It's like taking a simple sketch and turning it into a detailed painting.
Precisely. And by practicing sentence expansion, you'll naturally expand your vocabulary and your ability to express those more nuanced ideas.
That's awesome. I'm feeling inspired already. Okay, so now we've got solid sentences.
Yeah.
How do we build them into compelling paragraphs?
All right. Well, paragraphs are where we start to develop those ideas more fully. It's not just about stringing sentences together. It's about creating a unified thought, a cohesive unit. And this is where structure becomes really important. A well-written paragraph usually starts with a clear topic sentence, followed by supporting sentences that provide evidence, examples, or explanations, and then ends with a concluding sentence that wraps it all up nicely.
So it's like building a mini argument, right? You present your point and then you back it up with evidence.
Exactly. And once you've mastered paragraph construction, you're well on your way to tackling larger forms of writing, like essays and articles.
Now, I've got to admit, I sometimes get essays and articles mixed up. What's the main difference between the two?
Well, they both aim to convey information, but essays tend to present a personal argument or perspective. You're trying to persuade your reader to see things your way. Articles, on the other hand, usually focus on presenting information objectively, often using research and evidence to back up the claims.
Okay, so an essay is more about your own viewpoint, while an article is about informing the reader about a specific topic.
You got it. And then, of course, we have creative writing, which opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Yes, this is the exciting part. Creative writing is where you can let your imagination run wild.
It's definitely the place to play with language and experiment with different styles and genres. One of the exercises these sources recommend is free writing, which I often suggest to writers who feel stuck or intimidated by that blank page.
I've tried free writing before, and it can be so freeing. Just letting your thoughts flow onto the paper without judgment can be surprisingly productive.
It really is. It's all about silencing that inner critic and allowing yourself to explore ideas without any limitations. You might be amazed at what you discover in the process. And speaking of exploring different styles, these sources also highlight the importance of business writing, which is a crucial skill in today's world.
Absolutely clear and concise communication is essential in any workplace. But sometimes it feels like business writing has its own set of rules and conventions.
You're right, there is a certain level of formality and professionalism that's expected. But at its heart, effective business writing is still about getting your message across clearly and persuasively. One tip that people often overlook is understanding your audience. Who are you writing to, and what do they need to know? Tailoring your language and tone to your audience is key for getting your point across.
That's a great point. I've definitely made mistakes in the past when I haven't considered my audience's perspective. So we've covered a lot of ground already, from the basics of sentences and paragraphs to the nuances of different writing types. But how do we actually go from understanding these concepts to improving our writing skills?
That's where the real work begins. And luckily, these sources are packed with practical tips and exercises to help you level up your writing game. Let's dive into some of those strategies next.
Welcome back. Before we jump into the specifics of how to improve our writing, I wanted to touch on something that these sources emphasize, and that's the importance of finding your own voice. Oh, that's interesting. What does it actually mean to have a unique writing voice, and how do we even go about finding it?
Well, it's about developing a style that feels authentically you. A style that reflects your personality, your perspective, your way of seeing the world. It's what makes your writing stand out from the crowd and really connect with readers on a deeper level.
So it's not just about getting the grammar and structure right. It's about putting your own personality into your writing.
Exactly. Think about your favorite authors. They all have a distinct style that draws you in a way of using language that feels unique and captivating. It's like recognizing a friend's voice in a crowded room. You just know who it is instantly.
That's a great analogy. But how
Yeah.
can we cultivate that kind of distinctive voice in our own writing?
Well, it's an ongoing process, a journey of discovery. One exercise I always recommend is to try writing in the voice of someone you admire. Could be a favorite author, a historical figure, even a fictional character. Just step into their shoes and see how it influences your style.
So it's like trying on different voices to see what fits.
Exactly as you experiment, you'll start to get a feel for what resonates with you, what feels natural and authentic to your own way of expressing yourself.
Makes sense.
Okay,
So let's get into some specific techniques that these sources suggest for improving our writing. One that really caught my eye was the idea of using sensory details. Tell me more about that.
Sensory details are amazing for bringing your writing to life. Instead of just telling your reader what's happening, you're showing them by engaging all 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch.
Oh, so it's like painting a picture with words that allows the reader to experience the scene.
Exactly. Imagine you're describing a busy city street. Instead of just saying the street was crowded and noisy, you could talk about the bright colors of the shops, the honking cars, and the chatter of people, the smell of street food wafting through the air.
Wow, you're right. All that detail makes me feel like I'm actually there. So what other techniques can we use to make our writing more captivating?
Another one these sources highlight is using figurative language.
Okay, I've heard that term before, but I'll be honest, it sounds a little intimidating. Can you break it down for us?
It's actually simpler than it sounds. Figurative language is just using words in a non-literal way to create a more vivid or imaginative effect. Think of metaphors, similes, personification.
Oh, right. Like saying he was as brave as a lion instead of just saying he was brave.
Exactly. Figurative language adds depth and richness to your writing. It allows you to express complex emotions and ideas in a more evocative way.
It's like adding spices to a dish to enhance the flavor.
Exactly. And speaking of bringing things to life, these sources also talk about the power of dialogue.
Dialogue is something I struggle with. How can I write conversations that sound natural and engaging instead of stiff and awkward?
One tip is to simply listen to how people actually talk. Pay attention to the rhythm and the patterns of everyday conversations, the way people interrupt each other, the slang and colloquialisms they use.
So it's about capturing those little nuances of real conversations.
Right. Don't be afraid to use contractions and informal language in dialogue. It should sound authentic, not like something you'd read in a textbook.
Makes sense. And each character should have their own distinct voice and way of speaking, right?
Absolutely. Just like real people, your characters should have unique personalities and ways of expressing themselves. This will make them feel more believable and memorable.
It's like giving each character their own little melody.
I like that. Okay, let's move on to another crucial element of writing, and that's structure.
This is where I often trip up.
Oh?
I know that structure is important, but I'm not always sure how to organize my thoughts in a way that makes sense and keeps the reader engaged.
These sources offer some great insights on that. One common structure they mention is the classic 3-act structure. It's often used in plays and movies, but it can be applied to all kinds of writing, from novels to short stories, even essays.
Oh, I'm curious. How does this 3-act structure work in writing?
The first act is all about setting the scene. You introduce your characters, you establish the setting, and you present the central conflict or problem that drives the story.
Okay, so it's like laying the foundation for the narrative.
Exactly. Then in Act 2, the conflict intensifies. The protagonist faces obstacles, they make decisions, they experience growth and change. This is where the tension builds and the reader gets hooked.
And then in Act 3, we see the resolution of the conflict and the consequences of those choices.
Precisely. The 3-act structure gives you a clear roadmap for your narrative. It helps to create a satisfying and engaging arc for the reader.
Okay, that's incredibly helpful. Are there any other structures we can use in our writing?
Absolutely. Another common one is chronological structure.
Yeah.
You just present the events in the order they occurred. This is great for biographies, historical accounts, sometimes even fiction.
What about the compare and contrast structure? I remember using that a lot in school essays.
Yes, that's a useful structure for examining the similarities and differences between two or more things, It's a powerful tool for analyzing ideas, evaluating arguments, presenting a balanced perspective.
It's like having a toolbox full of different organizational strategies. We can choose the one that best fits our purpose and the type of writing we're doing.
Exactly. And the more you learn about different structures, the more confident you'll be in trying new things and finding what works best for you.
This is all so insightful. I'm realizing there's so much more to writing than I initially thought. It's not just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about crafting a world, developing characters, shaping a narrative, using language to evoke emotions, and create a truly immersive experience for the reader.
You're getting to the heart of what makes writing so powerful and rewarding.
Now, before we move on, I want to talk about one more crucial stage of the writing process, and that's editing. I know it's important, but I often find it to be the most daunting part.
I get it. Editing can feel like a chore, but it's absolutely essential for refining your work and making sure your message is clear and impactful.
Do you have any tips for making editing more effective and less painful?
One of the best things you can do is read your work out loud. This helps you catch awkward phrasing, repetitive words, sentences that don't flow well.
I actually try to do that sometimes. It's amazing how many mistakes I miss when I'm just reading silently.
It makes a huge difference. Another helpful tip is to get someone else to read your work and give you feedback.
That can be a little scary, but I know it's important to get an outside perspective, especially from someone who's a good writer themselves.
Absolutely. A fresh set of eyes can often catch things you've missed, and don't be afraid to ask for specific feedback.
Like, does this paragraph make sense, or is the tone right for the audience?
Exactly. The more specific you are with your questions, the more helpful the feedback will be.
And it's good to remember that editing is an ongoing process. We might need to revise our work several times before we're truly happy with it.
That's the beauty of it. Editing allows us to polish our writing until it shines. It's like taking a rough diamond and carefully cutting and shaping it into a brilliant gem.
I love that analogy. It makes the whole process seem much less daunting. Okay, so we've talked about a lot in this section, from finding our writing voice to mastering essential techniques like using sensory details and figurative language.
We've also explored different ways to structure our thoughts and talked about the crucial role of editing in refining our work.
I'm feeling so much more confident and ready to tackle my writing goals now.
That's great to hear. And guess what? We're not done yet. In our final segment, we'll discuss strategies for overcoming those common writing challenges, and I'll share some ideas to keep you inspired on your writing journey.
Welcome back. We've been on quite a journey, haven't we, exploring the world of writing in English.
We have. And, as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to remember just how rewarding writing can be. It's not just about communicating with others, it's about connecting with ourselves, too.
I've always felt that way when I write. It's like I'm having this conversation with my own thoughts and feelings, untangling things and finding new perspectives along the way.
That's it, exactly. Writing can be a real journey of self-discovery, a way to process our experiences, understand the world around us, and explore those hidden parts of ourselves.
Like journaling, but with more intention and introspection.
Exactly. And the best part is you don't have to share those personal reflections with anyone if you don't want to. They can be just for you, a private dialogue between you and the page.
That's comforting to know now before we go. I know a lot of people struggle with finding the motivation to write, especially when they hit those inevitable roadblocks. What are some strategies we can use to stay inspired and keep those creative juices flowing?
That's a great question, and luckily these sources offer some really helpful advice. One common challenge is the fear of making mistakes. which can be paralyzing for a lot of writers.
Yeah.
But it's crucial to remember that mistakes are a natural part of the learning process. Even the most successful writers have drafts filled with scribbles and revisions.
That makes me feel so much better. Sometimes I get caught up in trying to make every sentence perfect right from the start, and it just ends up blocking my creativity.
Perfectionism can be a real creativity killer. Embrace the messiness of the process. Allow yourself to experiment, to play with language, to make those so-called mistakes. That's often where the magic happens.
It's like giving yourself permission to be a beginner again, to approach writing with that sense of curiosity and playfulness.
Exactly. Another obstacle that many writers face is a lack of ideas. Staring at that blank page can be really daunting. One technique that can help is brainstorming. Just jot down any idea that pops into your head, no matter how silly or unrealistic it might seem. You never know what might spark something brilliant.
I love that it's like throwing a bunch of different ingredients into a pot and seeing what delicious dish comes out.
You got it. And if brainstorming doesn't work, try changing your environment. Sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective to get those creative juices flowing. Go for a walk, visit a museum, find a cozy coffee shop. New surroundings can often lead to new ideas.
I can definitely relate to that. I get stuck in a rut when I'm in the same place day after day. A change of scenery is often just what I need.
Right. And let's talk about another common problem writers block. That feeling of being stuck staring at the blank page with nothing coming to mind.
I know that feeling all too well. It's like hitting a wall.
When that happens, sometimes the best thing you can do is step away from your writing for a bit, engage in activities that inspire you, read a book, listen to music, spend time in nature, let your subconscious mind work its magic, and you might find that those words start flowing again when you come back to it.
That's such good advice. It's easy to get caught up in the pressure to produce, to force ourselves to write, even when we're not feeling it. Sometimes we just need to give ourselves permission to rest and recharge.
You're absolutely right. Writing is a marathon, not a sprint. It's about consistency and dedication, not about churning out words as fast as you can.
I'm so glad we had this conversation. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools to approach writing with more confidence and enjoyment.
I'm happy to hear that. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought. Embrace the journey. Writing is a process of continuous growth and discovery. The more you write, the more you learn, the more you refine your craft, and the more you discover your unique voice and perspective.
That's beautiful. So to everyone listening, keep writing, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep believing in the power of your words.